Welcome back, friend. You made it through another day, or at least most of one. That's worth something. Tonight, we're diving beneath the bandages of history, into a place where science was mostly guesses and leeches were a legitimate love language. So pull up the blankets, let your shoulders drop, and let's drift somewhere moist and mildly alarming. If this kind of absurd calm is your thing, consider leaving a tiny offering in the form of a like or a comment. It always begins with a bite. Not sharp, not violent, just wet. A mouth with no face. A face with no opinion. A creature that doesn't love you, doesn't hate you, but deeply, deeply wants to know what you taste like. Tonight, we descend into the slippery world of medieval medicine, a place where science was more of a vibe and the leech was king. Imagine, it's the year 1293. You've just woken up with a headache, a mysterious pain in your left foot, and a sense of moral decay. You turn to the only person who calls himself a doctor in your village, a man who once apprenticed with someone who once saw a real physician from a distance. He tells you you're suffering from an imbalance of humors. Not the funny kind, the wet kind. Too much blood, he says, shaking a small wooden box. Don't worry, I've brought help. You expect a tool, maybe a potion. What he reveals is a leech. Small, glossy, flexible, like a sausage casing with ambition. It wiggles with intent. It knows what it came for. He places it gently on your arm. You feel a tickle, a pause, then a tiny pull like someone trying to drink a thought from your bloodstream. Is it working? Hard to say. Your vision is blurry, but that might be the blood loss. Or the fact that the second leech is now climbing toward your neck like it's on a spiritual pilgrimage. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. You aren't sure if it's real or if the leech has entered your auditory cortex. Still too much blood, the doctor mutters. He adds another, and another. Soon you've got 5 little medical interns clinging to your limbs like wet apostrophes with bad intentions. Your pulse slows. You feel lighter, drained, vaguely flattered. This isn't just medicine. It's performance art. It's therapy by osmosis. It's the oldest subscription service in Europe. And it's only just begun. Not just anyone could apply a leech. It required skill, patience, a complete disregard for personal space. The ideal practitioner was part barber, part mystic, and part mushroom enthusiast. Credentials? Unclear. But if they owned a hat with a feather, they were probably qualified. You arrive at his wooden shack. It smells of lavender, ash, and something faintly like wet wool. He greets you with a nod, not warm, not cold, just professional. On his table, a bowl of water trembles slightly as if anticipating something. Inside, you spot them. The leeches. Resting. Plotting. Meditating. It's hard to say. He asks where it hurts. You point to your head. He nods gravely, then gently lifts a leech and places it behind your ear to calm the voices, he says. You didn't mention voices, but now you wonder if you should have. The second leech is applied to your ankle. That's where the anger lives, he explains, though you feel fine. Mostly, at least until the third leech lands on your chest for the romantic confusion. You nod, pretending this makes sense. Each leech acts with slow, deliberate intention. They don't bite. They embrace. They latch on like old friends returning to finish a story. He hums softly, possibly to the rhythm of your pulse. Or his own. Or the leech's. No one's sure. You try to speak, but the practitioner raises a finger. Let them listen first, he whispers. You close your eyes. The room spins slightly. You feel the strange comfort of being slowly drained by professionals who never once asked how you're feeling emotionally, and yet somehow they understand. Not all bleeding was medical. Sometimes it was emotional. And in medieval times, when you couldn't write sad poetry on social media, you turned to the next best thing. Leech therapy for the heart. You were in love. Or something like it. You saw a shoemaker's daughter across the market and felt a flutter in your chest. The local healer called it excess warmth of the blood. The cure? Obviously, neck leeches. You sit in a chair. He gently places one just above your collarbone, the romantic leeching zone. It hesitates, then latches on like a kiss you didn't expect but secretly wanted. You feel complicated. For those suffering heartbreak, the ritual was different. A cold stone floor, a candle, a leech placed on the inner wrist, the vein of yearning. As it drank, it was said to pull out memories, one sip at a time. One nobleman reportedly sent his ex a pouch of used leeches, dried and tied in ribbon as a statement. Historians still debate whether this was an insult or a desperate plea. The answer is yes. Of course, couples sometimes did it together. Not out of necessity, but romance. Picture two people in love, reclined side by side, letting tiny medical worms whisper secrets into their bloodstream. That's not just therapy, that's intimacy by exsanguination. Even poets joined in. One wrote, "Her gaze, a wound. Her kiss, a cure. But still I bled. So I applied for." Leeches were the Spotify playlists of the 14th century. You chose the right one for your mood: pining, regret, reckless passion, or spiritual confusion. Some healers had entire drawers labeled by feeling: envy, betrayal, too many dreams. And so love and blood became tangled, not in metaphor, but in practice. In medieval hearts, a leech wasn't just a treatment. It was a mood. By the late 1300s, leeches weren't just medical tools, they were fashion. An accessory. A statement. And sometimes an accident that people pretended was intentional. Healers began placing leeches in symmetrical arrangements like organic jewelry. 2 on the wrists, 1 on each temple, 1 delicately tucked beneath the chin for elegance. A noblewoman was once seen entering court with a live leech attached to her décolletage, claiming it was seasonal. Leech prints began to appear in fabric designs, swirling, looping patterns meant to evoke their gentle scorn. One particularly ambitious tailor created a cloak with tiny velvet pouches, each housing a live leech. He was bitten 17 times. He died happy. Some monasteries kept decorative leeches in glass bowls lit from beneath with candles. They were considered calming, like a lava lamp filled with bloodthirsty kamas. One particularly eccentric baron imported albino leeches from a mountain cave and trained them to respond to harp music. No one knows how or why, but he was regarded as very modern. Children kept them as pets, mostly by accident. A dropped leech was often forgotten until it reappeared in someone's shoe or dinner. In time, people began giving them names. Bertram, Nibsy, Lady Dampington. Eventually, some artists began incorporating leeches into paintings not as symbols of illness, but of refinement. A self-portrait from 1412 includes a single leech crawling down the subject's cheek, as if to say, "I bleed, therefore I am." Of course, this trend led to imitation. Young men wore fake leeches carved from wax or shaped from licorice. They lacked the suction but held the style. And so, the aesthetic was born. A culture of quiet dignity, soft hissing jars, and black specks that meant you were interesting. Or healing. Or at least not boring. As with most medieval trends, the moment something became fashionable, people started bringing it home. And so began the era of domestic leeches, pets, therapists, and vaguely damp companions who didn't shed or bark but occasionally escaped into soup. Families kept them in shallow clay bowls or little wooden tubs by the hearth. The truly devoted built leech shelves tiered platforms beside the bed in case of midnight melancholy. Some swore that sleeping near them improved dreams. Others reported waking up mysteriously pale. Children named them, spoke to them, argued with them. One boy reportedly taught his leech to recognize tone of voice. It bit him every time he shouted. A fair system. Feeding time was ceremonial. A finger dipped. A toe offered. Some used the family pig, who became unusually sluggish but emotionally balanced. There were even leech-sharing arrangements between neighbors, though disputes arose over whose blood they preferred. Leeches, after all, had personalities. Some were shy, others aggressive. One famously artistic leech would only attach itself in spiral patterns. Another refused to feed unless Gregorian chant was playing. When a household leech died, which they did, eventually, usually after biting the priest, it was given a small funeral. A candle. A box. A single flower. Some families even painted little portraits of their favorites, with captions like, "He took my pain," or "She cured my aunt's mood." And just like that, leeches became more than medicine. They became memory, a presence in the home, something to care for, to fear slightly, and to explain awkwardly when guests asked, "Why is your coffee table moving?" Every village had one. A jar, blackened with age, filled with water the color of secrets, kept behind the apothecary's counter or buried halfway in a muddy floor. It didn't have a label. It didn't need one. Everyone knew this was where the leeches lived. The jar made noises. Not loud ones, soft burps, gentle pops, occasional wet sighs. Some claimed it hummed at night. Others swore it whispered names. No one tested that. Leeches came from all over. Marshes. Rivers. One merchant claimed his were imported from a sacred bog where monks never left. He charged double. People paid. Misery loves premium sourcing. You'd approach the jar with reverence. The healer would open the lid like revealing a relic. Inside, a dozen dark forms, swaying gently, waiting. They looked up or seemed to. It was unclear where a leech's eyes actually were. That only added to the drama. Selection was key. You didn't just grab any leech. You chose based on vibe. Too quick? Too greedy? Too still? Probably sleeping. Just the right wriggle, that was your match. Transactions varied. Some healers let you rent them. Others insisted you return them after use. A few offered loyalty cards, every 10th bleed is free. One even had names etched on the jar, fallen patients, or perhaps past leech champions. Black jars had histories. Some were heirlooms. One was rumored to be made from the melted helmets of disappointed crusaders. Another had teeth marks. No one asked whose. Occasionally, a leech escaped, crawled across the table, climbed a sleeve, bit someone important. These events were seen not as accidents but signs, divine messages written in moist punctuation. In truth, the jar wasn't just storage. It was ritual. A meeting place of trust, biology, and deeply questionable choices. It was only a matter of time before the church got involved. After all, where there was blood, there was doctrine. And where there were jars full of wet creatures drinking people's humors, there were questions. Opinions varied. Some priests believed leeches were holy agents, tiny monks with no mouths for lies and no limbs for temptation. Others called them blood gluttons and banned them from altars. A few quietly kept their own, stored beneath the confessional. One abbey specialized in spiritual draining. Confess your sins, then offer your forearm. A leech would be applied to release the burden. The more you confessed, the more leeches were added. It was said that truly repentant souls often needed 4, sometimes 5 if they danced too provocatively at midsummer. A bishop once claimed to see the Virgin Mary in a particularly round leech. The creature was venerated for 3 days before it bit a choir boy and was thrown into a pond. Miracles have limits. During Lent, some devout believers fasted from leeches entirely, a noble sacrifice. Others merely switched to dry leeching, placing leeches on the body but denying them blood. A symbolic gesture, unsatisfying for everyone involved. Sermons began to reference them. As the leech draws poison from flesh, so too must we purge our souls, preached one friar with suspicious bite marks. He never addressed them. People respected that. Monks debated whether leeches had souls. One argued they must, since they inspired such strong feelings. Another countered, they are neither good nor evil, merely moist. A point difficult to refute. And in quiet chapels, in moments between chants, it wasn't uncommon to hear a soft squelch beneath the pews, a reminder that in the great spiritual drama of the Middle Ages, even leeches played a role. Justice in the Middle Ages was many things, swift, inconsistent, occasionally dictated by a goose. But in some corners of Europe, punishment involved not just stocks or whips, but the steady suction of leeches. Minor offenses, gossip, blasphemy, goat-related trespassing were often met with bloodletting. Not to harm, but to rebalance the wicked. A man who insulted his neighbor's beard might be sentenced to 5 leeches, 2 on the arms, 1 on the neck, and a double dose on pride. In one town, petty thieves were paraded through the square with leeches dangling from their faces, a walk of shame, but wetter. Crowds watched in silence, unsure whether to pity, cheer, or check their ankles. For repeat offenders, punishments escalated. Leeches were applied in symbolic numbers, 7 for envy, 10 for greed, 13 for dancing during Vespers. The most dreaded? The triple circle leeches arranged in rings around the chest, back, and knees. No one remembered what crime it was for. Everyone remembered the look in the healer's eyes when he prepared it. Some saw this as cruelty, others as mercy. After all, no bones were broken. Just removed politely, 1 drop at a time. Occasionally, criminals embraced the punishment. One arsonist claimed he burned houses just to feel the soothing draw of the post-trial leeches. He later opened a spa. A few argued that leeches were too forgiving. They do not judge, one constable complained. They simply drink. A poetic complaint, but accurate. Of course, leeches couldn't be bribed, swayed, or reasoned with. That made them more trustworthy than most juries. And so, in the damp corners of justice, they slithered forward, equal parts sentence and redemption. Because in a world where truth was flexible and punishment creative, sometimes the only fair judge was a worm with a plan. Somewhere in the hills, just beyond the screaming goats and plague fog, there was a place where people went not to be cured, but to be indulged. A spa, a retreat, a moist haven. You arrive after 2 days on horseback, your emotions dusty and your limbs uneven. The air smells of moss, steam, and mild regret. At the gate, a monk in sandals offers you a towel. It's damp. Everything is. The leech spa is carved into stone. Pools bubble softly. Murals show saints with puffy cheeks and suspicious neck wounds. You're ushered into the reception bleeding room, warm lighting, flute music, and a bowl of complimentary vinegar wipes. A specialist greets you. He is either a doctor or a very confident stranger. His robe is too short and his hands are cold. He places 3 fingers on your forehead and says, over thoughts. You nod. He nods. A jar is opened. The spa menu is vast. The melancholy drain for artistic suffering. The full medieval reset, which includes head-to-toe suction and a light sermon. And the royal flush, available only to those with titles or excessive sighing. You choose the seasonal balance, 5 leeches placed along the spine, each named after an emotion: doubt, envy, tired joy, haunted nostalgia, and tax anxiety. They latch on in unison like synchronized swimmers of sorrow. As you lie on the warm slab, you feel your regrets being sipped away. One leech hums. Another burps. You are healing. In the next room, someone is weeping with gratitude. Or possibly anemia. Either way, the energy is peaceful. You're offered a leech smoothie afterward. It's just wine with a story, but it feels earned. You leave lighter. Not just physically, emotionally. You paid someone to reduce your existence by 4 ounces. And in that strange subtraction, you found something close to peace. As the Middle Ages matured, like a cheese left too long in the sun, so too did its scholars. And with them came theories. So many theories. Most were wrong. Some were dangerous. All involved leeches. Universities sprang up with entire departments dedicated to dynamic fluid management. Professors wore blood-stained sleeves and debated loudly about leech placement, optimal draining angles, and whether leeches could detect lies. One renowned scholar, Geoffroy the Damp, published a 312-page manuscript titled On the Circular Humors of the Lower Back. It contained diagrams, marginal doodles of angry worms, and a recipe for fish stew. He was celebrated as a visionary, mostly because no one understood him. Academic feuds erupted regularly. Was the elbow a superior leech zone to the knee? Did the moon affect suction rates? Could a leech inherit trauma? One university split in two after a heated symposium about whether two leeches placed on opposite ears could balance the soul. No resolution was found, but one attendee fainted dramatically, which was counted as progress. Leech journals appeared, handwritten scrolls passed from scholar to scholar. Titles included The Quarterly Suck, Leech and Logic, and the controversial Post-Bite Modernism. Some students became so obsessed they tattooed leech schematics on their arms. One built a tiny monocle for his pet leech. It was immediately lost inside his boot. Lectures were open to the public. Villagers attended with snacks. Some brought their own leeches in satchels, hoping for extra credit. Others just wanted to see academics argue while slowly bleeding. Of course, no one ever reached consensus. But that wasn't the point. The goal was motion, circulation, the exchange of blood, and occasionally ideas. Because in the great academic tradition of the Leech Age, wisdom wasn't measured in truth. It was measured in how much you were willing to lose to prove it. Not all leeches stayed in one place. Some wandered, or rather were carried in damp sacks by people with strange intentions. These were the traveling leeches, the nomads of medieval medicine. Healers took them from village to village, offering pop-up clinics under trees or beside suspicious wells. A wooden bench, a jar, and a man with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's watched too much draining. That was the setup. You'd trade a coin, a potato, or an interpretive dance, depending on local customs, and he'd reach into the jar without breaking eye contact. Always one hand. Always too slowly. These traveling leeches developed reputations. Some were said to prefer musicians. Others refused to feed on left-handed people. One was known to twist into a perfect circle before biting, a blessing or a threat, no one could tell. Children followed the wagons, chanting names like Sticky Pete and the Thirst King. Parents disapproved, but secretly they remembered their own first bite. Stories spread. A leech that cured hiccups. Another that caused uncontrollable honesty. One legendary worm allegedly left behind a scar shaped like St. Catherine. Or possibly a snail. Testimonies varied. Of course, not all traveling leeches were welcome. Some towns had seen too much suction. They posted signs, "No leeches after dark," or BYOB, "Bring your own bandages." But the travelers came anyway. Slowly. Softly, one jar at a time, because blood was universal. And where there was warmth, there was work to be done. Art in the Middle Ages had rules, gold halos, stern faces, no smiling. But outside monasteries, in candlelit huts and drunk poetry nights, leeches wriggled into the creative world, uninvited and unforgettable. Painters began including them subtly. A single leech curled on a saint's sandal. Another clinging to a sinner's ear, possibly whispering temptations or tax advice. Some said it symbolized temptation. Others just thought it looked cool. A traveling bard once wrote an entire ballad in iambic bleeding. "O gentle worm, who drinks my gloom, thy kiss more kind than love or tomb." No one clapped, but everyone listened. Twice. Musicians caught on. One lute player tuned his strings to match the pitch of his favorite leech's feeding rhythm. It didn't help musically, but people claimed it felt authentic. Another group invented the wet drum, a bowl of leeches slapped in time to chants. The leeches didn't enjoy it. The audience was confused. Still, the vibe was memorable. Scribes composed entire illuminated manuscripts dedicated to the humors and their hungry friends. In the margins, tiny illustrations of leeches jousting, wearing hats, or reading books upside down. These were not metaphor, just mood. In love poetry, leeches became symbols of longing. She took my heart, then my arm, then my blood in perfect form. One anonymous poet submitted a 400-line ode titled, "Drip Me Like One of Your French Leeches." It was rejected by the abbey but popular at weddings. Even stained glass wasn't safe. One rural chapel had a window depicting Saint Apollonia battling a swarm of leeches mid-sermon. The priest refused to explain it. He just nodded slowly when people asked. Because in a world where suffering was sacred and worms were medicinal, it made perfect sense to find inspiration in a small, glistening mouth. Some called it disgusting. Artists called it honest. At the highest reaches of society, where robes were heavy and crowns gave headaches, leeches weren't just tools. They were appointments, rank, symbols of divine drainage. Royal leeches lived in luxury. Gilded jars, silk-lined troughs. They dined only on noble blood, never peasant. One queen reportedly fed hers a drop of perfume each morning to improve the flavor. No one asked who tested it. The royal leech master was a coveted position. Half doctor, half diplomat, full-time jar wrangler. He wore robes embroidered with writhing patterns and carried a scepter topped with a carved leech. Some say the leech moved. Others say the scepter did. Every monarch had their own ritual. King Theobald of the Damp favored a circle of 5 around his navel every full moon. Queen Marguerite insisted on 1 leech per finger for balance. Prince Elric once hosted a tournament where each knight sponsored a leech. The winner latched fastest. The loser was eaten. Not by the leech, by the court jester. Long story. Royal leeches had names. Heraldic crests. Personal scribes who recorded their accomplishments, such as drained the Duke of Left Elbow, 1392. Survived the Papal Blotting Incident, 1401. Refused to feed on a traitor. Knighted. Some courts threw leech galas, elegant affairs with live demonstrations and speculative betting. Courtiers whispered which vein will it choose, with the same tone others reserved for horse races or scandal. A famous tapestry once showed a king bleeding into a goblet, flanked by leeches holding tiny scrolls. It was meant to symbolize wisdom or taxation. Interpretations vary. Of course, not everyone was impressed. A visiting ambassador from the east fainted upon seeing the king's ceremonial crown leech positioned just above the temple. He was revived with vinegar and never returned. But within those velvet walls, leeching wasn't just medicine. It was majesty, proof that even the most powerful had something to lose and something to give. Behind the clean jars and candlelit clinics, another world slithered, one of stolen blood, forged slimes, and back alley suction. Welcome to the leech underworld. It began innocently enough. A healer short on supply. A noble demanding 12 leeches for his elbows by sundown or else. Desperation breeds creativity, and sometimes crime. And scrupulous vendors began bottling counterfeit leeches, small sausages dipped in oil, tied at both ends. Sold to the unsuspecting, they'd fall off mid-suck and cause emotional confusion. Some swore they worked anyway. Placebo is powerful. Others trafficked wild leeches, caught from questionable swamps and trained using questionable methods. One gang in Bruges was said to whistle train theirs, teaching them to respond to lullabies and the smell of regret. Pickpockets started specializing in leech theft. A quick sleight of hand, one jargon. Victims often didn't notice until they reached into their cloaks and found only brine. One noblewoman reported losing her entire evening bag of emergency suckers on the way to Vespers. Fake leech clinics popped up in alleyways. For a small fee, you'd lie back and receive the experience. Sometimes it was a wet sponge. Other times, just a warm thumb and convincing narration. Oh yes, it's draining you now. Very spiritual. Keep breathing. There were turf wars. Rival leech crews fought over damp corners of the city. Graffiti-marked territory, crude worm symbols, often misspelled. One infamous fight ended with 12 jars shattered, 3 actual leech bites, and a parrot yelling, "Suck him," repeatedly. No arrests were made. Even clergy got involved. A monk was excommunicated for blessing leeches in bulk and selling them as divinely pre-chewed. Demand was high. Ethics were low. But despite the chaos, the market thrived. Because people would always chase hope, even if it was slimy, unlicensed, and slightly too enthusiastic. In the dark, damp corners of the world, leeches didn't just heal. They hustled. In the muddy corners of the medieval mind where science blurred into stories and fear wore moss as a hat, leeches held a special, shivering place. Folk believed that leeches could sense sin, that a stubborn leech refusing to bite meant your soul was impure. Villagers would stare nervously at jars, whispering, "Try again on the other arm. Maybe that side repents." Some claimed leeches could predict weather. If they floated belly up, a storm was coming. If they danced in the jar, someone nearby was lying. If they curled into a question mark, beware, a neighbor might confess something awful. There were rules. Never name your leech after a relative. Never place a leech on the heart before sunrise. And never, under any circumstances, kiss it, even if it seemed to ask. In one village, children were told that misbehaving would summon Old Dribble, a ghost made entirely of abandoned leeches. He slithered through floorboards looking for toes. Parents swore he was real. So did several priests. The floorboards stayed suspiciously moist. People tied leeches into protection charms. Tiny satchels of dried worms hung above doors to keep the humors aligned. Some were worn as necklaces, fashionably terrifying. One trend involved freezing leeches into rings of ice and wearing them until they melted, thus washing away last month's mood. Wartime saw soldiers carry leech bones, if such things existed, to ward off cowardice. Spoiler, they were usually just pebbles. But belief is belief. And of course, dreams. If you dreamt of a leech on your tongue, it meant secrets were eating you. If it spoke to you in Latin, you were either blessed or in trouble with the bishop. Possibly both, because leeches weren't just creatures. They were omens, mirrors, moist little metaphors that crawled through stories, reminding medieval minds that the body was leaky, the soul was spongy, and sometimes healing came with a squish. Every career must end. Even the most celebrated of leeches must one day hang up their sucker. Not literally, that would be grotesque, but symbolically they retire. And when they do, things get oddly ceremonial. In prestigious clinics, there were farewell rituals. A leech who had served nobly, draining counts, confessors, and constipated bishops was given a soft sponge, a candlelit bath, and a name if it didn't already have one. Usually something like Mildred the Moist or Sir Rigolot. They'd be released into retirement ponds. These sacred waters shimmered with history and possibly salmonella. People whispered to them like old monks, thanking them for their service. One rumor claimed a retired leech once cured a man simply by winking. No one could verify this, mostly because leeches can't wink. But he did feel better. Some were preserved in jars, placed on museum shelves beside herbal scrolls and inaccurate models of kidneys. Children would press their noses to the glass and ask, "Did this one really suck a king?" And the tour guide would nod gravely because yes, that was King Aldrich's calf drainer, retired after a heroic double-bite session. Private collectors emerged. Eccentric nobles kept cabinets labeled heroic hematophages and held soirees where guests could sip wine and admire the dried elegance of the Red Duke of Dribblemere. No one asked what happened to his jarmate, Lady Swellthroat. Academic institutions, ever nostalgic, constructed leech libraries. Rows of scrolls, diagrams, and old blood ledgers. Some scholars swore they could still hear faint squelching if they stayed late enough. One even claimed a ghost leech nibbled his thoughts during grading season. But most simply faded. Quietly. Honorably. Their names forgotten, but their influence lingering in every relieved sigh, every lightened vein, every superstition passed down like a soggy family heirloom. Because even the smallest servant leaves ripples. And when your job was literally to take part of someone and carry it away. Your absence matters more than your presence ever did. They said leeches were done. Outdated. Too medieval. But like mustaches and vinyl records, they returned, uninvited, unfazed, and somehow trendier than before. In high-end clinics with brushed steel walls and $9 water, a quiet revolution began. Biological microcirculation therapy, they called it. Organic detox through targeted hematological modulation. Which is marketing for, yes, it's still leeches. But now they wear gloves. Socialites booked appointments weeks in advance. Celebrities whispered about secret sessions where leeches were flown in from Scandinavian bogs and fed only glacier water and affirmations. One influencer claimed her leech diet cured her fear of eye contact. Another posted a photo captioned, "Healing isn't linear, but it is moist." These weren't your muddy swamp creatures. No, these were artisanal. Selectively bred, emotionally validated, sometimes wearing tiny flower crowns for wellness retreats. Each bite came with a gluten-free biscuit and a gratitude journal. Meanwhile, the medical world tiptoed back toward legitimacy. Surgeons quietly admitted leeches were really good at restoring blood flow after reattachment surgeries. Their spit, full of enzymes and anticoagulants, worked better than half the pharmacy aisle. Science had rediscovered the worm. Universities launched new studies. Papers with titles like Suck and Let Heal and Applied Hirudotherapy in Postmodern Contexts appeared in journals. A TED Talk emerged. It went viral. So did the leech. There were podcasts, spa pop-ups, limited edition jars. A startup called Hemoglow raised $4 million to create an app-controlled leech experience. Their motto, feel the draw. Of course, some pushed back. Protesters held signs, hands off our fluids, and not again, Mildred. But for every skeptic, there were 5 curious clients ready to lean back, close their eyes, and let history nibble softly at their circulation. Because trends may change, languages may evolve, but the gentle pull of a leech on your ankle? That's timeless. It was only a matter of time. Someone, somewhere, looked at a wriggling leech and said, "I wonder what that tastes like." The answer, by most accounts, was earthy with notes of iron and regret. But that didn't stop medieval cooks, ever eager to impress or confuse, from experimenting. Leech stew appears in several questionable manuscripts, usually wedged between pages on plagues and goat ointments. Ingredients included garlic, vinegar, sadness, and 2 generous handfuls of recent suckers. Some recipes recommend boiling for 7 hours. Others simply say, pray and chew fast. In royal courts, adventurous chefs crafted blood puddings with bonus. That bonus was leech meat, finely chopped and passed off as exotic eel. Guests who realized the truth halfway through were told it's tradition. And once something's tradition, you're not allowed to gag. Out loud. Fried leeches became a street food in one unfortunate village. Sellers claimed they popped like joy. One chronicler described the sensation as like biting into a meat balloon filled with coins. Popular for about a week, then mysteriously banned, possibly by divine intervention. Cookbooks from the period include strange entries like leech flambe for the pious gut, for ways to soften a sucker, festive worm loaf, a winter treat. Some recipes swore by soaking them in ale overnight to mellow the bite. Others insisted leeches should only be harvested during a full moon when the humors are tender. There was even a belief that consuming a leech granted immunity to bleeding. Not medically, just socially. People would stop asking you how you felt. They just nod and back away slowly. In modern times, a brief revival occurred in avant-garde restaurants. One dish, leech foam on bone broth air, earned a Michelin star and a lawsuit. Diners were told it was symbolic. Some demanded therapy instead. Because while history may forget, the palate remembers. And for those few brave enough to bite back, the leech was not just medicine. It was a meal. A chewy, heroic, deeply alarming meal. In the dustiest corners of forgotten apothecaries, scribbled between weather predictions and mushroom calendars, lived an ancient system, the leech zodiac. Unlike the stars, which were far away and mostly decorative, leeches were intimate, immediate, and moist. So medieval mystics decided, why not let them chart your fate? 12 leech signs existed, each tied to a bite location and symbolic meaning. If a leech first latched onto your arm, you were a grasper, bold, stubborn, bad at letting go. A bite on the ankle? Wanderer, dreamy, allergic to ceilings. The navel? Centerborn, confident, hungry, too into scented oils. There was jocklinger, biters of the chin, destined to lead or confuse, knee-finders loyal, creaky, and the rare earlobe whisperers, intuitive, mysterious, possibly always listening. Healers kept elaborate charts, mapping bite frequency and direction. A clockwise suction pattern meant your finances were improving. Counterclockwise suggested emotional turbulence or an upcoming visit from your in-laws. One book, The Worm Within, Astrology of the Drain, outlined compatibility. Centerborns pair well with graspers. Avoid jocklingers if you're a sensitive neck drinker. 2 elbow biters in one household? Chaos. Some nobles wore badges of their bite sign. Others arranged marriages based on leech charts. Our suckers aligned, said one duchess before marrying a man whose leech once bit the same thigh vein on the same day. Destiny. There were even leech horoscopes. This fortnight, your blood may be pulled toward new ventures. Let it, but avoid damp cellars after dusk. Saturn frowns upon mildew. Skeptics laughed, but quietly in case the leeches were listening. Because people believed, and sometimes still do. A few modern alternative wellness sites offer suction-based self-discovery. One includes a quiz. Where would a leech bite you first? Followed by personality analysis and coupon codes, because whether or not the stars can guide us. A well-placed worm just might. The church canonized many figures for miracles, walking on water, surviving lions, fasting for decades. But in obscure corners of religious history, there were others, those touched not by flame or voice, but suction. Take Saint Bledwin of the Jar, a 9th century monk who reportedly cured a king's melancholy by placing a leech on his belly button and singing softly in Latin. The leech danced. The king wept. The court recorded it as an incident of mild sanctity. Then there was blessed Euphrasia the Used, who claimed that each of her 37 leeches whispered scripture when left undisturbed. She transcribed their murmurs into what became the glistening psalms, a wet, squelchy devotional read mostly in caves and by people with extremely open minds. Some saints were said to bleed not only for others but through others. One account tells of Father Gilbert who, when excommunicated, unleashed a swarm of loyal leeches into the bishop's font. No one was harmed, but the water was textured. He was reinstated a week later with caution. Pilgrims made long treks to shrines that claimed to hold the original drainer, a jar said to contain the dried remains of the leech that once fed on St. Apollonia's toe. Locals sold tiny replicas carved from plum pits. Tourists complained they looked like raisins. Miracles included a blind man who claimed to see after a leech latched to his nose. The leech was knighted, then stepped on accidentally. A child cured of hiccups when a leech crawled across his prayer book and formed the word hush. A baker who received a vision of heaven, described as mostly damp and echoey after sleeping with a leech under his pillow. Most of these stories were quietly removed from official records, but scrolls remain, whispers linger, and once a year, in a village that won't name itself, the faithful gather around a small pond to chant. Bless the squirm, bless the sip, take our worries, drop by drip, because miracles take many forms. Some wear halos, others just wiggle. In a time before dermatologists, filters, or shame, beauty was a battlefield and leeches were among its slipperiest weapons. Women and men of the medieval elite believed that clear skin came from cleared blood. Enter the cosmetic bleed. A leech on each cheek, sometimes 2 on the temples for symmetry. They didn't just treat acne, they rebranded it as imbalanced humoral destiny. Very chic. One noblewoman claimed her signature glow came from twice-weekly chin siphonings. Her portraits reveal a radiant face and a deep reluctance to smile, possibly because her jaw was still numb. Beauty manuals of the era featured bizarre guidance like, for pallor, apply 1 leech beneath each eye and recite a flattering sonnet. To soften the neck, let the worm crawl freely until it rests. Then trust. Blush may be feigned with pinching or earned through enthusiastic drainage. A traveling healer named Margot the Damp became famous for her leech lift, a technique involving 7 leeches arranged along the collarbone to draw youth upward. Side effects included dizziness, existential dread, and compliments from confused monks. In some courts, it became fashionable to show off your treatment marks. One duchess wore decorative silk patches in the shape of flowers over her bite bruises. Another had hers traced in gold leaf and called it blood contour. A painter captured her likeness. Viewers called it bold and damp. Of course, there were failures. A leech slipped into an eyebrow and caused a trend, the wormed arch. It lasted 3 weeks. Historians still argue whether it was satire or sincerity. And while beauty fades, documentation does not. Today, in certain dusty archives, you'll still find instructions like, for youthful vigor, let 3 leeches drink before sunrise while standing in fog. If fog unavailable, sigh deeply and proceed, because vanity is eternal. And somewhere deep down, beneath the skin and the self-esteem, history is still biting back. The year was 1432. You'd received an invite, sealed with wax, faintly damp, and shaped like a worm. The note read, "Come drain with us. Welcome to the Leech Party, a strange and squelchy blend of medicine, merriment, and mild group hysteria. Held in candlelit cellars or suspiciously humid parlors, these gatherings promised wellness and social prestige. You didn't just host to heal, you hosted to impress. The more jars, the more status. If your centerpiece had floating leeches arranged in a spiral, you were someone. Guests arrived in loose, flowy garments, ready to present veins. There was a sign-up scroll, a waiting area, refreshments, mostly broths and nervous fruit. Musicians played slow, wet-sounding instruments. One was just a jug filled with fog. The main event began with the drawing of the first blood. A chosen guest knelt beside the host jar and whispered a blessing. Then the first leech was ceremonially applied, often to the inner wrist, sometimes the earlobe for flair. Groups formed circles, hands joined, sleeves rolled. Healers wandered the floor, gently offering suction with phrases like, "This one's gentle. She prefers collarbones. Let it choose you." Games were played. Guests that bite blindfolded, of course. Drip and pass, a jar passed hand to hand, whoever it bit first had to recite a haiku. And suck or truth, the details are unclear and blessedly lost. At midnight, the leech waltz began. Guests moved slowly in circles, holding jars to their hearts. It was quiet, emotional. Some wept, some fainted. One nobleman claimed he saw God, and she was covered in loss. The party ended with toasts, warm broth in tiny silver cups. Guests shared what had been drained from them, worry, melancholy, my sister-in-law's voice, because nothing said community quite like synchronized bleeding. And though these parties faded with time, their memory lingers, like a ring of teeth, and a damp invitation. So here we are, not drained, but changed. You've traveled through a history squirming with detail, medicinal, absurd, occasionally romantic in a moist sort of way. You've met leeches that cured kings, that kissed popes, that danced during full moons and whispered secrets to lonely monks. You've attended dinner parties with blood pudding, spa retreats with emotional worms, and rituals where healing required a hymn and a towel. And yes, it was strange, but also human. Because leeches, for all their slime and squish, held up a mirror to us. They revealed how far we go to fix ourselves, to believe in something, to surrender, sometimes literally, a piece of ourselves in exchange for hope. They reminded us that medicine was once storytelling, that healing involved candles and chanting and the soft plop of something wriggling into a jar, that the line between science and superstition was drawn in blood, erased, and drawn again, repeatedly. Even now, we search in creams, in crystals, in curated retreats on Instagram. The names change, but the ritual remains. And somewhere, deep inside, we're still that villager holding out an arm in the candlelight, whispering, "Take what's wrong with me and leave." So yes, this story was about leeches, but it was also about bodies, and belief, and how ridiculous, hopeful, and gloriously weird we are when we try to feel better. Thank you for wandering here. Thank you for bleeding gently. Now rest.